Harmless, Johnny boy. You think hijacking a cargo ship with, by the way, aid for Somalia, pointing a gun at the crew and demanding they hand over money is harmless. What is going through your head? Welcome back to History Revealed. I'm Joel, and today we're going to be reacting to Johnny Harris's video on Somali pirates. Now, as you can see from the thumbnail, our pirates are the good guys. We're going to be in for a bumpy ride. I'm expecting emotions will run high on this one. Mainly my emotions. But putting that to one side, I'm sad to say that my appeal failed and my channel is still demonetized. Still, I'm fighting it. I will not let it go. There is no reason for YouTube to demonetize me. I did not reuse anyone's content. This isn't over. But in the meantime, I really need your help. So please subscribe to my Patreon. I have my first few supporters on it. I would love to have more. Love to offer so many things to all of you who sign up. So please do that. And so let's get on with the video.
Pirates are everything from Norse sailors who raided other ships on the high seas, to the famous pirates of the Caribbean like Britain's Blackbeard, who stole a French slave ship and souped it up into the ultimate pirate vessel.
That is true, and it's a very interesting fact that the Queen Anne's Revenge, which was Blackbeard's ship, was more powerful than many Royal Navy warships. So that's the kind of weaponry that pirates once had their hands on.
Pirates were poor men who were looking for money and social mobility. Some of them were looking for fame and glory and power in a time where seafaring men had little status or opportunity in society.
I'm not sure about that. It sounds like he's trying to start a narrative, start spinning the web early on. Yes, some of them were poor. I mean, if we're talking about, well, he mentions Blackbeard. If we're talking about that period of piracy, the golden age of piracy in the Caribbean, it was different in the Indian Ocean and in other places. The reason for the piracy was, yes, they were poor, but it was because the Royal Navy very stupidly laid off thousands of, maybe not thousands, but a whole load of sailors in the Caribbean at the end of a war with Spain, meaning you had all these people on the other side of the world who were unemployed. So they had the skills, but no job. They had the sailing skills, and what did they do? They applied their skills to piracy. So it's a bit of a simplification. And seafaring men didn't have status. I mean, we're going back a bit further, but did Francis Drake not have status? Sort of loved by Queen Elizabeth. I know that's a bit before this time, but Britain especially, I can't really comment too much on the other countries because I don't know about them, but there were plenty of well-known naval figures from Britain, England. So it's a strange statement to make there by Johnny, but let's see how this progresses.
The government of Somalia collapsed in the early 90s. The country fractured, and instead of a central government, local clans started to control patches of the country. There was no real government to regulate this 3,000-kilometer coastline, the longest coastline in Africa.
So this part is correct, and it's a very interesting phenomenon that Somalia effectively became a failed state. And American viewers or Americans will know that America intervened briefly in Somalia in the 90s under Bill Clinton, and that is where we had the notorious Black Hawk Down incident, where, of course, US airmen ended up becoming victims to Somali mobs when their helicopter crashed in Mogadishu.
In Africa. As a result, huge fishing boats, mostly from Iran and Yemen, took advantage of this free-for-all, swooping in to these unregulated Somali waters to fish. These foreign fishers would steal hundreds of millions of dollars of seafood every year with nets that tear up the seafloor, destroying the ecosystem and depleting the fish stock in the process.
Right, I'm going to have to stop you there, Johnny, because again, with this weaving a narrative, a lot of what he's saying is true, but he's leaving out very key details. So let's go back to the map. So I'll show you here that, as you can see, this is the coast of Yemen. Now, it's not labeled, but Yemen has maritime disputes with Somalia, as does Kenya in the south. And what that means is that Yemenite vessels will be going into Somali waters, well, allegedly Somali waters, which it claims as its own. And it would be the same for Kenya in the south, even though he's not mentioned Kenyan vessels as such. Now, the way this works is every nation has what are called territorial waters, which are 12 nautical miles off their coast. Now, the area which he is just sort of blanket saying are Somali waters are disputed. So every country with a coastline is entitled to declare what is called an economic exclusion zone, and that's 200 nautical miles, which is pretty much this area that he has shown as Somali waters. Now, by doing this, you can claim all the natural resources within the sea in that area. So whether it's oil, gas, fish in this case, or whatever else, it's yours. And it's yours to do as you see fit. And any foreigner at all who wants to exploit the resources in that zone has to have a license from you and official permission from you. Now, because Somalia was in such a terrible state, because it was a total disaster of a country in the 90s, it hadn't formally applied for an economic exclusion zone. There's a process you have to go through at the UN in order to do it. They didn't do that. They just declared it to be. And that's not how it works. And so various countries didn't actually recognize that economic exclusion zone existed at all. So what that means is one country, if you're interested, is Norway. The Norwegian foreign minister is on record as saying that Somalia didn't do it properly, and therefore it couldn't enforce an economic exclusion zone. So it is a complicated matter, sort of, foreign vessels taking fish, but he's painting it in pure black and white. Somali territory or Somali coast waters invaded by foreigners and exploited by foreigners, and that's not really the case. So let's see what else he's got to say.
These foreign fishers would steal hundreds of millions of dollars of seafood every year with nets that tear up the seafloor, destroying the ecosystem and depleting the fish stock in the process. This illegal fishing by foreign vessels started to outsize the catch of locals whose water this was. Local Somali fishermen with their tiny boats couldn't compete, and soon this illegal foreign fishing eclipsed the catch of local Somalis. Around the same time, companies from Switzerland and Somali's former colonizer Italy were illegally paying corrupt factions of the Somali government to take their toxic waste, some of it even being radioactive. Tons of this waste ended up in both Somalia's land and water, which would go on to have significant effects on the health of local communities. So, it's the 1990s, and between the illegal overfishing and the waste dumping, Somali people's main livelihood is being pillaged by foreigners, and they don't really have a government to help them out, to protect them. So some Somalis decided to fight back.
Okay, there you go. It's just the way he's portraying this. He's so desperate to portray the pirates as the goodies, as the good guys, the lovable rogues, shall we say. He's right about the dumping. It was disgraceful. Foreign companies did do it. However, Somalia's dysfunction allowed them to do it. Unfortunately, you will have bad actors who exploit these situations, but it really is 6 and 1 and half a dozen. It takes 2 to tango, and it was a combination of badly intentioned foreigners, as he mentioned, Swiss and Italians, but also many corrupt Somalis who were involved in this. But he is swallowing the pirates' narrative whole. He is bitten on the hook, and he is dragging hard because they want to be portrayed as people who are fighting back against sort of foreign invaders. And as he says, they took matters into their own hands because of the way they were being pillaged by foreigners. So he's simplifying a very complex situation, even though he is giving good information at the same time.
An American cargo ship taken over by pirates.
Somali fishermen got together and they formed an ocean militia. Some would call themselves the Coast Guard, and they would use these tiny boats to chase down foreign fishing vessels and demand that they pay a fine. Some experts have called this subsistence piracy because it was piracy, but it was also kind of fishermen defending their livelihood from predatory foreigners. And at first, it was rare. I mean, if you look at the data, you just see a handful of successful incidents every year. Oh, and they were pretty basic too. Like in one of these early incidents of Somali piracy, back in 1994, You've got this wooden boat full of 26 Somali men claiming to be the Somali Coast Guard. And they go up to a shipping vessel and they get on board. They hijack it for 5 days, but realize they can't really do anything. So they just steal as much as they can from the cargo ship and just go on their way. Yes, this was piracy, but it was super basic and kind of harmless.
What? Harmless? Johnny boy, you think hijacking a cargo ship with, by the way, aid for Somalia, pointing a gun at the crew and demanding they hand over money is harmless? What is going through your head? My God. This is where he loses so much credibility when he talks like this. And you hear the way he says, oh, they like he's some kid. Oh, they hijacked it and then they took what they could, as if it was nothing, as if the whole thing was just I don't know, some minor crime incident. And by the way, interesting how he talks about how they were a coast guard supposedly stopping illegal fishing and dumping, yet they attack a cargo ship. And this is all the way back in 1994. So his whole narrative of are Somali pirates the good guys because they're protecting the coastline and they're protecting Somali's income, yet they're attacking a cargo ship. No, they're greedy and they're profit-seeking. They're not protecting anyone but themselves. And I hope that an incident like that is clear. The incident he's talking about was when the MV Bonsella cargo ship was hijacked. Now, what you've got to remember, like I said, it was an aid ship. It was a cargo ship transporting aid, and the pirates fired mortar rounds at it. Then, of course, boarded it and did the whole hijacking activity that he's just mentioned. Well, casually mentioned, shall we say. Completely undermining his narrative, as we say, all the way back to the beginning. Why would you attack a cargo ship? Why would you attack an aid ship if you're just protecting against fishing and dumping? Makes absolutely no sense. And I hope he realizes that it doesn't make sense. It's all unraveling.
And organized crime networks that control different parts of the country. And piracy, this thing that started off as an informal coast guard, was maturing in sophisticated ways.
I hope he says something useful.
By 2005, you start to see pirates using motherships, larger ships that allow them to go way further off their coast, and then to use speedboats to attack like they did to this cargo ship. This was a huge level up for Somali pirates. These motherships started to be equipped with radar, which allowed the pirates to have new ways of detecting their prey. You start to see them have GPS systems or satellite phones to communicate. Pirates start looking at shipping industry blogs and databases to locate and track shipping vessels. This was turning from basic subsistence piracy to something more sophisticated. Pirates started to realize just how much money and value was flowing through this corridor, headed towards the Suez Canal, like one of the busiest highways of international trade in the world. And
yeah, now, what he said there is really good. And made very clear and informative. Yeah, the use of motherships and then smaller vessels. I believe they're called skiffs, the speedboats that they use to attack the larger ships, the cargo ships, or whatever else. And yeah, they got sophisticated. They were using radar and using shipping forecasts. I think actually people often underestimate the sophistication of criminals, whether it's in Somalia, and I think a lot of people are shocked when they hear about the sophistication of various sort of drug cartels, in Mexico and other places. These are big operations, and Somali piracy was no different. So it's good that he points it out, and of course, he correctly identifies that all that trade going through the Gulf of Aden into the Red Sea and then through the Suez Canal, 12% of the world's shipping goes through there, and a huge amount of global trade. 12% of global trade, I think, goes through there. And a huge amount of the world's shipping, a huge percentage goes through that area. So it's real rich pickings for the Somali pirates. By the way, if you want an idea of how important the Suez Canal is to global trade, just remember what happened when that tanker blocked the whole thing, completely disrupted global shipping. But that's a different story.
If you simply refuse to pay, the pirates have a lot of hostages. The consequences of those being shot, for instance, would be unimaginable.
All of this influx of ransom cash kicked off a pirate economy cycle, where pirates would attack a ship, hold the crew hostage, and get paid a high ransom. They would bring this back to the clan leader warlord who funded them, which would make that person rich and allow them to invest in bigger boats and more guns and recruiting more young men and appeasing the local coastal communities who would support them, which they would use to hijack more ships in more sophisticated ways. And it repeated and repeated, getting more and more sophisticated and dangerous each time.
Right. Again, so it's a shame he has to do the stuff he did earlier, because that is really good information. It explains how the the cycle of piracy works and the business model that they had, and how it connects with Somalia's society, the clans, and the people who are investing in these enterprises. Like people put money, sort of like you'd invest in a company. They invested in pirate raids on ships, and if it succeeded, they get a return. If it failed, they lost their investment. I think this says a lot about Somali society, that people are investing in hostage taking, really foul practice. And of course, I think people like Johnny Harris would excuse this as just a result of poverty. But I think you really need a certain level of moral decay to be investing in something like that, regardless of how poor you are. There's plenty of poor countries in the world where this sort of thing isn't going on. But really good information, and of course, this is the best thing about his videos are the production quality. It's truly excellent, and the way he explains how the pirate economy worked there is absolutely superb. So I've knocked him in this video so far, but I will give him praise where it is due, and it is due in this case.
This was no longer the DIY Coast Guard. This was now lucrative, organized crime. And yet, some of these pirate groups still tried to make a moral case as to why they were justified in doing this.
A moral case which someone like him is quite amenable to.
Saying that this wasn't piracy, this was retaliation for all of the exploitation of Somali waters by foreign countries.
I feel like he's about to say why that's not the case, but didn't he spend the first part of the video saying how they did have a moral case? He's gone back and forth a bit here.
You see this in a 2008 hijacking of a Ukrainian vessel, when these pirates demand $8 million, claiming that they would use the money to clean up the toxic waste that European companies had dumped in their waters. Yes, European companies have dumped toxic waste in Somalia. Were these pirates actually going to use the $8 million to clean that up? Probably not. At least that's what we found in our reporting. A lot of the moralistic, like Robin Hood narrative became really thin once warlords got involved and once they demanded a return for their investment. And you just start to see how thin this moral argument is when pirates start boarding ships and just shooting crew at random to show how serious they were and to increase the likelihood of getting a high ransom payout.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad he's mentioned that. Okay, he's redeemed himself a bit here, because the idea that it was the moral narrative that the pirates were trying to put forward, that they were just defending Somalia and this, that, and the other. It's hard to justify that when you are just cold-bloodedly murdering people on the decks of ships. That's very difficult. They could try, but as he says, I mean, he's still a bit nostalgic. He's like, the early days, it was makeshift, and they had a good cause, but it all went wrong. But okay, he's acknowledging here that it's a very dirty business. It's a murderous business. It's sort of using humans as bargaining chips. It really is a sordid affair, Somali piracy. There is no sort of romantic sheen to it at all. So it's good he acknowledges that and sort of gives his evidence well. Big improvement from the early part of the video. And one of the reasons these moral arguments are so important is because in order to tackle a problem, there needs to be moral certainty about the problem. Now, this is often sort of disregarded or not considered at all, but knowing why you're doing something morally is often just as important as practically, because it'll be the whole motivation, the whole means of cooperation. If it's understood that the whole idea of protecting fishing zones or protecting from dumping waste is just a fig leaf, you are just dealing with sort of with murderous people, then that changes the whole way you address the problem. And I'm glad he's done that, and it's the unfortunate reality of Somali piracy.
A U.S. container ship was traveling from Oman to Kenya when 4 pirates boarded and
Maersk,
hijacked the ship,
Alabama. Very familiar
holding the
name.
crew hostage and demanding $2 million. The U.S. government has a firm policy that it doesn't negotiate with hostages, but what they do is send in their military. So after 4 days, the Navy SEALs arrived with snipers. They shot 3 of the 4 pirates and rescued the crew. It was an incident that was later depicted in this Tom Hanks movie. These were dramatic events, a hostage situation with snipers and Navy SEALs, and it spread into the international news cycle in a way that Somali piracy just hadn't before.
But Captain Phillips was taken hostage for almost 5 days and then rescued by the US Navy.
It was clear
I am the captain now. No video on Somali pirates would be complete without mentioning Captain Phillips and the Maersk, Alabama, and that inspiring story of the ship that fought back with the support of probably the best special forces in the world. It's always nice to have. We can call on elite snipers who I almost said I feel sorry for the Somali pirates there. I do not feel sorry for them, but you have to admit it's pretty unfortunate for them. These sort of stock militants from Somalia suddenly face to face with the Navy SEALs, not what they bargained for. So, well, you're going to meet a sticky end if you behave like that and the US military gets involved. Okay, so we've had a real mixed bag of information from Johnny so far. The good, the bad, the ugly, and he's about to round off his video, so let's see what his final thoughts are.
But this leaves us with kind of a complicated resolution here. These communities were left behind by their government. They don't have the infrastructure of a society where people can thrive and work. That's for a lot of reasons, but it's in part because of the pillaging and the exploitation from outsiders. And so while these warlords who committed horrific crimes to get rich deserve no moral justification, it is morally complicated when you look at people who are just trying to live, whose waters have been poisoned by toxic waste, whose country has been pillaged, and who turned to piracy as a last resort. But
okay, so he's come full circle. So he went from swallowing the pirates' narrative whole to actually acknowledging, yes, they were murderers, and giving very good information about how they operated, back to swallowing the narrative whole. Oh, their land's been pillaged by foreigners. They were just looking for a way to live. These poor people. How could we expect them not to take hostages and not to execute Westerners? It's too unreasonable. It's a really sad ending because there's lots of good in this video, but the thread he's weaved through the video is that sort of there's, he says there isn't, but there's hints of moral justification. Oh, if only the situation in Somalia wasn't what it was, which was created by foreigners who are pillaging. That word pillaging, he's used that one a few times actually. It's their fault. So yes, the Somalis did bad things, but they were forced to do it by evil outsiders. And as he acknowledges, there's moral complexity, which he sort of goes in and out of viewing. Yes, there is moral complexity. Foreigners did behave badly, especially with the dumping of the toxic waste. I think the fishing is a bit more debatable, but the dumping of toxic waste is bad. But obviously, like we said before, the Somalis were involved, and I don't think he really wants to sort of go into too much detail about sort of the nature of Somali society, the violence of that society. Bear in mind, I mean, we've not really covered it too much in this video, how much they were killing each other. Forget about foreigners. The violence, the clan-based violence in Somalia, the civil war, was so brutal. And it's Somalis killing Somalis. I just don't think he wants to sort of acknowledge this is probably the product of a very violent sort of, and in many ways, dysfunctional society. So thank you for watching today. Please like, subscribe, share, shout out the window about this. Remember, I am on Patreon, and I'm very pleased to announce my first 4 patrons. They're on the screen now. Thank you so much for your support. I really hope more of you can support the channel, as I'm still demonetized, as I mentioned earlier, with a failed appeal and lots of hard work going forward trying to get my channel back, but I will do it. So thanks again for watching. I'm Joel, History Revealed, and I'll see you on the next one.